All right. We're here for another episode of Confessions of a Street Broker. And joining me today is a longtime battlefield competitor and friend, Corbin Blount with Lee & Associates. What's going on, man?
Hey, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Long-time listener, first-time caller, if you will.
So, we just got done spending about 2 hours looking at deals and stuff. And so we're glad to have you in here today, man, and kind of hear your story and everything. And but first off, I kind of had this conversation yesterday with another guy, and I want to get your take on it. What do you think about the ponies going to the ACC?
Man, how cool is that?
It's pretty good.
We missed our chance at the Big 12, and I think the ACC is great. We had no idea where we wanted to be.
Yeah.
Just a bigger conference.
Yeah.
But what's cool is at SMU, you can call 10 boosters and you can raise all the money that you're going to lose on your TV deal for the next 10 years. And
I'm kind of pissed that they didn't get in the Big 12. Like that was my hope, because I mean it's kind of like expat Southwest Conference,
Absolutely.
But because now it's so weird that we played Cincinnati or Central Florida. It's just, anyways. So,
but I think we'll have a lot of cool road games.
Yeah, you will. You will have some cool road games for sure,
and it'll be really cool for basketball.
Yeah,
when we come to Dallas. So,
and you got Florida State coming here next year to play.
Yeah.
Although, God, you got to be a little nervous about them trying to get out of the conference. So,
yeah,
a lot of people have an opinion on that stuff. I think they screwed a bunch of kids in that deal. I mean, I know their quarterback was hurt, and that's kind of probably the ultimate decision-making power, but like...
And, when you look at Liberty beating SMU out for a January 6th bowl, their logic doesn't add up with Florida State.
Yeah.
Liberty kept winning, so did Florida State.
Yeah.
It's just kind of backward.
Well, and, it's funny, the other thing, everybody was... like on Twitter was like talking about, the Georgia game. They were like, oh, Florida State, you had your chance to show up. And I was like, they just won 13 games and you told them that meant nothing.
Right.
So what is this? Like, if I'm some kid that probably comes from a background that has no money and I have a shot to go to the NFL, this is a way to change my family's life. Why would I risk this?
Absolutely.
So I don't know. But at the end of the day, that's pretty cool for the ponies. And so it's always like kind of watching their lines and staying in tune with them. And my nephew goes there now, so it's
you have a little vested interest in the ponies now.
A little vested interest in the ponies.
Fair.
So, but just kind of tell us your story, man. I know you grew up in Dallas, but I'll just kind of let you kind of tell us that.
So grew up in North Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
I was playing football my whole childhood. Went to TCA up in Addison.
Mm-hmm.
Played there in high school and knew that I wasn't going to play at the next level.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it, but I was always told by my dad, if you can live without it, do. If you can't live without it, play.
Yeah.
And I knew kind of early on that I didn't want to go to the next level, and frankly wasn't good enough to go to the next level.
Yeah.
My dad's been a land broker here in DFW for 50 years.
Yeah.
So I've been around the business forever.
Yeah.
Knew that I wanted to go into real estate, but I didn't really understand enough about it.
Yeah.
I originally wanted to develop.
Mm-hmm.
Straight out of school, it's real tough to get into development.
Yeah.
And when I was 17, 18, 19 years old, I thought it'd be really cool to develop hotels.
Yeah.
In hindsight, when things are good, you build one hotel every 2 years.
Yeah.
When things are bad, you don't build them for 5.
Yeah.
So, all things considered, I landed in the right spot.
Yeah.
But I knew I didn't want to be solely a land broker.
Yeah.
I rode that wave up and down my entire life. So I love doing land now, but the end goal is let's go build a building and lease it.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different.
Yeah. So you get out of SMU, and did you go straight to Lee & Associates at that point?
I did.
Okay. So did you interview with any other shops?
So I kind of talked to some of the big guys, right?
Yeah.
Stream, JLL, Colliers,
mm-hmm.
some of the smaller groups, Rubicon, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Smith over at ML Realty, good family friend, introduced me to Adam Graham.
Okay, cool.
So met with Adam, and our personalities jive pretty good.
Yeah.
And so met with him, Nathan over there, and worked with those guys as my mentors for the first several years, and could not have picked a better spot.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's funny, we were talking earlier today. I was like, Lee & Associates is a national firm, but it doesn't have that kind of feel to it. At least not the Dallas office does, and I always kind of, I guess, think of y'all as like, very similar to Mercer Company. just better suits and prettier, a little prettier.
Yeah, you can thank Nathan Denton for that.
Yeah, I remember when Nathan Denton, when Haynes was over there, and Nathan Denton and Haynes were working together, I go, this might be the prettiest group of guys in commercial industrial real estate.
Definitely the best dressed in industrial for sure.
But that's I've always had great relationships with a lot of the Lee guys. I don't, it's always been good. And then we worked a lot of transactions together just in Brookhollow, and so just always a lot of great things coming out of that shop. Steve Williamson, all those guys. Y'all got a good group of dudes over there. Crew. So. Well, okay, so you got in the market, what, about 2014?
Into 2014, September.
So that was kind of when things were, no one knew if things were changing yet, kind of. It's kind of like, I started in 2010. Things started, things were still pretty bad then. And then there were still, what was interesting is there was still inventory. So I guess that's really what I'm saying is there was inventory.
Yes.
It's like, back then you could be like, you go make a call on the guy in Brookhollow and he's like, I need a 30,000 foot building to buy. And you're like, I'll be back tomorrow with 10 of them, know?
Yep.
And now it's like, if someone probably says, hey man, do you want to buy I want to buy a 30,000 foot building. You're like, I'll let you know if one comes available.
Exactly.
It's a lot harder game on that type of stuff. And, that was, I always kind of call a wheelhouse deal for me was selling a 30,000 foot building. And, that changed dramatically starting 14. I'd say it probably started like 16, 17. Then it started getting a little tighter.
And obviously with COVID
went crazy. Tighter. But it got a lot tight right before COVID because what was interesting was like, I think all these private equity shops one day decided to go to some convention and they came up with these terms like urban infill and core and last mile.
Yep.
And when they did, they went, Brookhollow,
about as infill as it gets.
Yeah. And so all these investor groups started showing up to buy buildings about late 17, early 18. And like everybody was buying buildings down there. I'm like, where did these people come from? Like, I've been down here for years and no one would buy this stuff.
And I remember those buildings would trade for $55, $65 a foot when I got in the business.
Yeah.
You, I'm sure, remember $45 a foot.
Oh, I remember when at one point in time, Jason Mosier had a ton of, when I started, Jason Mosier had a ton of listings and he got them all because he priced them at $35 a foot. And everybody was like, you're insane. I've sold buildings in the teens per foot in Brookhollow. I sold a building at 18 a foot in Brookhollow.
That's incredible.
Like, it's like, when does that happen? Like, it's
and what does that building sell for today?
$100 a foot minimum.
Easily.
So, yeah, everything started creeping up. And at that point in time, Prologis was selling their assets down there. Mm-hmm. They're like, get us out of this stuff. Can you believe that?
Unbelievable.
And now, they sold, I remember, so Prologis put everybody on the song and dance train and come pitch for selling all of our Brookhollow buildings. And I think Clint Riley ended up winning the business on that deal. And he sold like, I don't know, 4 or 5 buildings for them. And probably would have been more at some point, I think some point halfway through that, they went, oh, shoot, we shouldn't do this. So, it was very, very strange. And that was about the time they bought DCT. And so anyways, that's what's the interesting thing about that. Now, the one thing I've noticed in Brookhollow, though, is like, it's a weird market. And I feel like the capital guys don't understand the makeup of who's a tenant and who's an owner down there. Because what I've seen is you have some capital group that's going to buy they got to buy like a 40 or 50 to kind of even make it worth doing.
Sure.
Right? Well, a 40 or 50,000 foot building in Brookhollow is occupied by a user. They don't want to pay rent.
That's right. And that's a big building in Brookhollow, too.
That's a big building. There's probably only like 10 buildings over 100,000 feet in Brookhollow. And so what was interesting there, too, is like, so they buy this 50,000 foot building and then they price it at a price point where you could go to the airport and get a brand new building for the same price. So you have to take a 50 to 60 year old building, 70, year-old building now,
Yep.
and say, okay, hey, I want the same price, but you're infill. But it's like I can go to the airport and get a 32 clear foot building for the same price. So,
right, and this one's 16 clear with no sprinklers.
So it's interesting. I was looking at how much there's actually right now currently a lot of vacancy on the lease side in Brookhollow.
Same up in Bellwood too.
Yeah, and it's all owned by these capital groups. And Bellwood's a very big user market too for a long time. And it kind of reminds me. I don't know how much you ever messed around the design district. I stuck my toe in and I was like, this is not the place for me.
I agree.
But, I looked, I want to say in 2021, you know what the vacancy rate in the design district was? 17%.
Wow.
Because everybody paid all this money for all these buildings and then they had to justify their capital. So I don't know. It's been a very interesting evolution. And I've always heard people say that they're going to tear down Brookhollow one day and build buildings, but that ain't never going to happen. You got to you still have these owner users all entrenched in there. So you got to get a lot of people on board to assemble land down there.
Of course. And imagine the basis you would have in buying a couple buildings and assembling it. You'll never be able to make the rent work.
No,
Pennsylvania.
Absolutely not. So I don't know. It's interesting, but you work a lot of Brookhollow area, but you kind of work up into the Stemmons and then you're also doing some national stuff too. So
I am. I would say probably 25 or 30% of my tenant rep work is out of market, typically out of the state of Texas.
Yeah.
I enjoy it. It's definitely a little different than kind of, boots on the ground, knocking on doors, but it has provided a lot of perspective into these different markets.
Yeah.
And I enjoy, going to the Pacific Northwest and seeing how they build buildings up there.
Yeah.
And, going to Reno, Nevada and figuring out how they build buildings in the mountains. It's always just been interesting to me.
So how did you pick up these kind of corporate tenants? I mean, were they like Dallas people that you hey, I can service your needs across the nation type thing?
So typically, pick up a tenant rep deal, say, hey, I know you have 20 locations across the country, but let's use this as a trial run. Yeah. If you like the way I service your business and you like the way we work together, I'd love to help you on another too.
Yeah.
And you kind of grow into getting the full portfolio business.
Yeah.
It is a lot of work being out of market. And you know how it is. You get a broker from Cincinnati emailing you for lease rates and a flyer.
Yeah.
You don't really put a whole lot into that.
Yeah.
So, you got to have a good co-broker. You got to have boots on the ground.
Yeah.
But, once they realize that you're representing someone who's a large national client, they typically kind of change their tune a little bit.
And so if you need to go take a deal to another market, and there's a Lee office there, are you forced to use the Lee guy there?
Not necessarily. We always have to give them the common courtesy of, hey, we're in your market. We're looking for a deal that's 50,000 feet. Yeah. Right. But sometimes the Lee office isn't industrial focused. Sometimes they're an office shop or they do investment sales only. And for that reason, and my promise to my client, I'm going to hire the best broker on the ground, whether it's a Lee broker or someone else. Yeah. So there's many times I hire Lee brokers, but there's a handful of others where I haven't.
That's kind of I've thought about that. I was like, I always thought I was never at a shop where I kind of had that platform to sell, but I was always like, man, I could totally go, I worked some out of town deals and people are like, well, how would you do it? I go, I just go interview and find like someone is, I feel like that's equally as good as me or something, and work with that guy. And so that's kind of the interesting thing now that we're doing. We're starting, we were just talking earlier, I tell you, we're starting to do these debt and pref deals. I'm evaluating sponsors. I'm like, I'm a sponsor now. And so it's like, I'm just saying, okay, let me see this. Let me see this. How do you do this? And it's like, if I can find a crack in there where I'm like, well, we do that a lot better. I can be like, okay, well, this might be a reason we won't put money into you, But a lot of the stuff we're looking at is, like I said, is single tenant net lease retail. So you're talking about a guy that's probably stamped out this building 100 times. So, but we do get a lot of stuff thrown at us now. Like I had about a $5 million land deal thrown at us, and I was like, I looked at the deck in 2 seconds, and I was like, no, this guy's inexperienced. I can tell you right now, just looking at this deck, these people have never done this before, and so that's kind of the interesting side of how our business is evolving. We're always going to be a deal shop to buy buildings, but it's like we have another way, and I got into kind of lending the money because just. You have how many times you get an owner finance offer and the owner doesn't want to take it? And he's like, oh, I don't want to do this. And I literally started getting into loan and money by one of my listings, had a listing on Cash Road. And guy was like, hey, I want to sell this, want to get out of it. We were asking 1.7. And he was like, hey, I'll take 1.6 on it. We got an offer at 1.7 with 600,000 down at 8% interest. And this is back when money was at 4. And I was like, hey man, you need to take this. This is a good deal, dude. Yep. And it was funny too, because he was like, hey man, I would lease the building. I'm like, well, if you would lease the building, why wouldn't you consider doing this? This is like a lease with a big advanced payment. Yep. And if they screw it up, you take it back from them and your basis is that much lower in the deal. But he just didn't want to do it. And I finally went, okay, man, 1.6 is the number. And he goes, yeah. I go, I'll pay it. He's like, you'll buy it? I go, yeah, I'll buy it for 1.6 and I'll do the note. So I bought it for 1.6. I assigned it to the new buyer at 1.7. I borrowed $800,000 at 4% interest and then put another $200,000 in at 8% interest. So I made 4% spread on the bank's money and 8% spread on my money. Me and Romeo at Cantax bought it. We still own it. And the notes, and we did a 5-year note with them. It's coming due this year. But I was like, dude, there's like a market here for this. There's a guy that doesn't want to deal with the bank at some point.
Especially now.
Yeah, especially now. So like, that's where I've owner financed a couple of my buildings. So like, hey, would you owner finance? I'm like, sure. And so I think that's a very, Brookhollow, that kind of market lends itself to that kind of ability to do something like that. And so I think that's the one good thing about getting to work a market like that is you get a lot of creativity. And it's funny, on that other deal, that same deal, the guy had a shutter company and I sold his shutter company for him at the same time. He was going to throw it in the trash. I was like, no, your business might be viable. And I got a guy to buy it from him for like $150,000.
I mean, that's creative deal making.
Yeah.
100%.
So it's, I think that's the good thing about being a street broker is you got to just figure it out, man. Like you don't have a corporate handout coming down the line that's just, here's inbound deal, here's another inbound deal, and
right.
You got to go make it happen. So,
and some of the big shops, they're just, waiting on inbound calls to service the business. And that's great.
Yeah.
But if you ever leave one of those shops, those aren't your clients.
No.
And that's not your book of business.
No.
And for me, when I was out there talking to folks, originally it was, I want to build a huge book of business.
Yeah.
And in 20 years, it'd be mine.
Yeah.
And those would be my clients.
Yeah.
Not that I would ever leave Lee, but you want to build something of your own and create something yourself. That's kind of what I saw in Lee.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's what they're a very entrepreneurial shop, and at least the Dallas office really is. A lot. You guys own a couple buildings too, and stuff like that. And it's I think it's a great place to start if you really want to end up with some kind of something to hold on to down the road. Because to your point, one day you're not going to sit in the cube where they push the mail cart down and go, "Here's your new tenant rep."
Exactly.
And so, but let's see. So this is something I like to ask. So like, what was the worst cold call you ever made?
Oh, dude. So I was in the business maybe a month.
Yeah.
I was down there calling on Irving Boulevard and Mockingbird. It was a Friday midday, and I kind of, had been told Fridays everyone's a little happier to see you stop by.
Yeah.
So I went to test that. I walked in on a group, and it seemed maybe they had just moved in. The lights were off. And I said, hello? And this big old guy, about 400 pounds, around the corner. And he stares at me and goes, what the fuck do you want? I said, well, I'm Corbin with Lee & Associates. This building just sold down the street. I thought you might want to know about it. He said, do you know how to fucking read? I said, well, yeah. I was a little offended, just got out of saying, of course I can read.
Yeah.
He goes, well, it says no fucking soliciting on the door.
Yeah.
And I had my comp in my hand, and I went to set it on the desk. He said, don't you put it down. And I looked at him, and I looked at the door, and I threw it on the desk, and I just walked out. And I was, 3-4 weeks in the business. I had no idea.
Yeah.
But if that had happened to me today, it'd be a totally different story.
Yeah.
Of course I can't read. I'm in sales.
Yeah.
You can play that off a little bit better.
So it's funny. Jeff always taught us this when you got the no soliciting one. He goes, oh, I thought it said no smoking. I'm not smoking. I thought you just didn't want me to smoke in your building.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. It's so weird. Did you ever do a deal with that guy though?
No.
No.
I kept dripping on him. I think he was just kind of a local warehouse manager for a larger company.
Yeah.
So he didn't make the decision anyway.
Yeah.
He just happened to be the guy I crossed paths with.
Yeah.
So,
no, it's interesting how people will, they'll kind of shit on you for a long time. Then eventually they're like, okay, I mean, that's kind of part of it too. Like, they're like, you don't get it the first shot, and so you got to kind of you got to be consistent and making your calls and going in there and seeing that guy over and over again. And that's really your branding, right? That's you're branding yourself as the guy that's going to show up every month, you know, in his office and be like, I got to like talk to this guy at some point, you know? Right. And so that's how you end up winning a lot of business though.
And you know, no fault of his own. You catch a guy on a bad day. You just never know, right? Yeah. They don't have a need. You know, he's getting a divorce, whatever it might be. You just stay consistent.
Well, and you know, I always thought this. I was like, man, like business owners are thinking about running their business. We're thinking about real estate constantly, and they're like, I don't have to think about this for like 5 years. Like, what do you want to talk about? Like, this is, you know, I got to get orders out, or you know, whatever it is. And we're like, no, man, real estate's going on constantly because in our world it is, you know. So it's I always try to be mindful of that. But you know, I think the cool thing about what we get to do though is walk in all these warehouses and see how all these different people make money. You know, it's like things you would never think of. And you're like, you actually make money off that? Like, that's so weird.
I always, when I'm pitching a tenant rep deal, I'll say, I have to know, how'd you get in the fastener business?
Right.
How'd you get into selling nuts and bolts?
Yeah.
You know, it's always interesting. Did you just find something that had margin? Or was it a family business? I always find it interesting how these people end up in the insulation business or whatever it is.
Right.
And so, you know, when they send their financials out and you get to review them, you're like, you make how much money selling fasteners? It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. This sounds like a pretty good business.
No kidding.
No. Yeah. It was seeing all those different things. Just, I think it really elevates your business acumen where it's like, okay, man, like, you know, you eventually understand like, okay, this guy has to do this to get this out of the product. This is why he really needs a facility like this. And that's the interesting thing about industrial. I don't know. It could be very well same in other asset classes, but like, I don't feel like any of our buildings are really the same. You know, I feel like there hasn't been any congruency to buildings until probably the last 10 years of generation of building, you know, because you'll see a building built and it's like they did something weird and you're like, what? Like, who the hell thought to do that? It's so stupid now, you know, for some reason they did it at that point in time, but it's like, you know, and then you got to figure out how to make all these things work with like, especially the older buildings that we sell because they're kind of functionally obsolete now, you know, compared to what's out there. So what, you ever been in any real dicey situations where you're like, oh man, I might be fixing to get jumped here?
You know, luckily I haven't had any really bad ones, but I know of some in our office. I mean, Stephen Williamson walked in on a guy in a space he was just about to lease. He was doing heroin.
Oh God.
And, you know, had to usher this guy out of the building. The guy was coming to sign the lease in 10 minutes. Oh, God. You know, that's back when we had a bunch of vacancy.
Yeah.
And that stuff, you know, riffraff happened.
Yeah.
With vacancy as low as it was the last couple of years, and, you know, to an extent still is. Some of that riff-raffy stuff we don't see as often, but I haven't had one where I felt super in danger, but I've, you know, been touring in Hines and watched someone pick up a prostitute and watch people sell drugs out in the corner. I mean, unfortunately, you're in an industrial park, so that stuff happens.
That's where it happens.
Yep.
I did an office deal like 2 years ago. You know, just kind of a referral thing, but it was like a 20,000 foot office deal. So I was like, this is worth it. And man, it was so nice, like showing up to a building and there weren't needles on the ground or something.
And condoms.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Just like, oh, God.
I remember vividly, I was looking at a building with Keenan Cook years ago down in Hines. And there was, you know, some shrapnel from the night before on the ground. And Keenan saw it as he drove up and just parked on top of it. And so when my client showed up, he didn't see any of it because his truck was parked over it. But, you know, it's just kind of the lay of the land down there.
Well, you know, that's kind of just, you know, prepping your listing to make sure it looks right for everybody, you know?
Absolutely. Get there a couple minutes early, hide the needles.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny. So let me ask you this, kind of like, what's kind of like your routine of things? Like what are kind of the habits you do on a daily that make you, you know, have gotten you to the level of success that you are? Like, what do you think are kind of like your anchors of every day that you kind of get into?
Sure. I mean, I was told early on, this is not a job. This is a lifestyle. Yeah. If you're not constantly thinking about what you have working today and what you're trying to have working in the future, you're probably not cut out of the right cloth. So I think a lot of it is early mornings prior to having a baby.
Yeah.
I loved being in the office at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
It's quiet. I can get my day ready. And by 8:15, when some other people are coming in, I'm out the door to cold call.
Yeah.
And, you know, with a baby, obviously that changes. I like to spend time with her in the morning.
Yeah.
And so I get to the office, you know, around 7:30.
Yeah.
But if you plan the day before when you're leaving the office for the day ahead, I think that's huge.
Yeah.
If you go in the office at 7:30 and don't have a plan for the day, you're already behind.
Yeah.
So it's just consistency
and
knowing that, some days you're not going to have a ton of success working your program, but that if you continue to work the program, you're going to have success in the long run.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. That's that's an interesting thing, that just really prepping your day before, I think that's what makes like the greatest quarterbacks in the world, right? They just prep. So that's what, like, my son, he plays inside linebacker, and we always talk about Luke Kuechly and how great of a linebacker that guy was. But that guy was a maniac in watching film, and he could just tell you everything that was going to happen before it happened. So as soon as the snap went off, he'd watched that film so much, he just knew exactly where the play was going. Yep. And, and so I think it's the same thing, right? Like if you prep so much in, understanding your market that you work, understanding your clients' needs and all that stuff, and you're just constantly thinking about it, I think it just makes everything it makes it very easy. Right. It's not easy because the amount of work you're doing, but, some people like to think, that you probably had this situation where they're like, find me this building. You're like, here it is. They're like, that was too easy. You're like, well,
no, I track everything. I know this.
You don't understand all the work that went in behind it.
Right.
So that's a big key. Like, that was for me. Like when I started, I was always in the office really early. Just, to your point, getting out of the building, ready to cold call, at, 8 a.m., 8:30. Like I'd be at my first cold call at 8:30.
Yep.
And that way you can just call till lunch and get after it. And so it's I don't think a lot of people, you talked about it being a lifestyle. And, the other thing I noticed too, like, man, when you go on vacation, it don't stop.
Never.
And you're in transactional work, right? And there's usually a fuse lit, right? There's a lease expiration. There's a sale contract, an inspection period ending. And man, this is something my brother taught me, was just like, hey man, you're going to go on vacation, you're going to lose a deal. Just get over it. Like my brother actually had one of his clients who happened to be at the hospital when he was having a kid, like randomly, and then was like, hey, do you have a minute to talk? Like he was there for something else. And he was like, hey, do you have a minute to talk? He's like, I'm having my child.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah, but I don't think they
never
care.
Stops.
They don't care. They're like, oh, you're on vacation? Well, you're like, they love to be like, oh, easy money. What's up, man?
It must be easy being a commercial real estate broker.
Yeah. And they, we always go, well, we're hiring. You want to join?
Yeah,
like,
you come do it.
Yeah.
And, we're compensated very well when we transact.
Yeah.
But what people don't see that aren't in our business is all the things we do prior and post that deal getting done that we never get paid for.
Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, if you do a tenant rep assignment, guess what? You're now the property manager. Because they don't want to call the property manager. They want to call you. Because they're like, well, you got me into this. I'm like, sir, I just leased you a building for your business.
Right. I didn't freeze your pipes.
But at the end of the day, you end up facilitating those things because that's the customer service aspect of it, right?
Totally.
You're like, hey, don't call me for this. Call me when the lease is up. That's not going to work either. So, but yeah, no, there is a lot of, just customer service after the fact. It's like, I got a client and, he ended up subleasing 3 different tenants within his building. Like he put it all together. Well, who wrote the leases on it? Isabella did.
Right.
Right. And like, that's not, I got to pay Isabella for her time, but I don't charge him for it,
sure.
Well, what's something about you that no one really knows?
Oh man, that's tough. In our business, we have to be a big personality.
Yeah.
But I really do love the time where I can sit there in the quiet and just kind of decompress.
Yeah.
And, this business, it'll wear on you a little bit.
Yeah.
And I've always thought I had thick skin, but I've learned to grow it doing this. A lot of people look at successful brokers and say, oh, well, they deal with getting rejected all the time, but they just go about their day. It's what they do.
Yeah.
It's part of being weathered and a little salty.
Yeah.
But that stuff, when you lose an assignment or you don't get hired, like you take that to heart. But it's, those losses sting, but they're what motivate you to move forward.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, it is. It's when you feel like you had something kind of like, you did everything, we've all been on that pitch where you're like, I did everything right, and you still lose.
Right.
It's frustrating because sometimes you find out it was just like, oh, well, he was going to hire his brother-in-law no matter what.
Exactly.
Like
you were just in there to get the info.
He was literally getting the info from you to go give to someone,
right.
And so that's pretty painful, But and what sucks is you have to go back in and see that guy again.
Absolutely.
Because you're kind of like, well, when his brother-in-law screws it up, I'll be here, or maybe they hire another broker who gets it done. Who cares? But things change, right? Like, I would always tell guys, I'd walk in, they'd be like, hey, look, I work with so-and-so. I go, man, I'm just here to audition for second place,
right.
Like,
absolutely.
Like, just let me be the bridesmaid, and, life happens, right?
And oftentimes it's better to be the second broker on a project. Yeah.
That is no doubt. Like, man, you see, and usually that comes from kind of like an unreal. So I think that works on two sides of the equation, right? I think it works on the listing side where you have a very unrealistic landlord or seller. And the first guy works it and probably got them the offer that they needed to take, but they weren't ready to take it. So they fire him, hire you, and get pretty much the same offer and end up taking it.
Yep.
Because they're like, okay, well, I did everything that I could. So it sucks for the first guy. But to your point, being second in,
not always a bad thing.
It's not always a bad thing. On the flip side of it is, I see this, you see this in buyer and tenant rep. And the going into the deal, some buyers, and some tenants, they're chiselers, man. They want to just negotiate, and they lose that deal because they're like, hey, there's another deal, and they're like, commercial real estate guy broker me, whatever. Well, then they lose it, and then they're like, oh shit. So the next one, they don't screw around, and we were talking about like Andre, right? Like client of mine that we both know very well and trying to work a deal with right now. And so when we bought his building on Union Bower, he was like, we were like $50,000 apart. He's like, I think I want to go in like $50,000 lower, like on the third round of negotiations. And they're telling us there was another deal and all this stuff. I just told him, I said, well, you must be willing to lose in order to win. So you willing to lose it? He goes, yeah, I think I am. I was like, okay.
All right, there's our answer.
and we got it. So, but being, it's the same thing with tenants, man. Some of them will chisel in the space that they got, they're like, I need this, this, and this. And then they lose it. The landlord's like, hey, I got another tenant. Like,
right. You got to move.
Yeah. And, kind of like what we were talking about earlier out there was like, the deal you're working in, with Rich, where it's like, hey, you have the cheapest, you have a gross lease at what net rates are,
right?
Like, you need to do this, man. Like, and that's been I'd say the challenge of being a tenant rep lately is that it's kind of hard to like show your value. You know what I mean? Where like we discussed, like back when we started in this business, you could kind of kick some teeth in and really, do some stuff. But now it's a little harder. And then you got to convince the client that this is a good deal, and they're just staring down the barrel of a pretty big market increase. So
and I get it, right? At some point, you can't afford to operate at X.
Right.
But if you can pass that through to your customer, that's the way you got to do it.
It's interesting. We bought this property down in Marble Falls, and the one of the tenants, it's a building, they're a cabinet shop and a barbecue restaurant.
Really?
Yeah. And so, we go in there, everybody's paying like $6 gross, and the market down there is 12 to 14 net. And I went into him, I said, hey, look, year one, $9 net. Okay. And they were like, we're just going to shut down. I didn't even think of this. So Joey in there, our asset manager, he goes and eats barbecue at every barbecue restaurant in Marble Falls and gets their prices. And he goes back to him, he goes, man, do you realize your prices are 40% below everybody else's? He's like, you need to up your prices, man.
Yeah.
Like,
and you can afford your new rent.
Yeah.
What do you know?
Yeah. Like, I mean, you should have been upping your prices years ago. You left all this, So anyways, we did a short-term lease for him to kind of let him absorb that. But to your point, this is all getting passed on at some point, and or it's been being passed on and you just had cheap rent for a long time. Right. And now it's coming to roost. So you just got to deal with it. So, but that's the tenant rep side of things. That's where, I still work a couple renewals and stuff. And it's just like, man, like, I know you're paying 5, it's 10 now,
those are tough conversations.
They're tough conversations. It's not received very well. You better have your data to show them the market. So, hey, here's all the market. Do you want to go look at it? And they look at the pricing, they go,
and then they do the math in their head, what it costs to move, and all of a sudden, that renewal doesn't look as bad.
No, it doesn't. So that's unfortunately where we're at. But I think that's just a product of Dallas-Fort Worth being the superpower that it's turning into. So
I agree.
Well, here's one other question I like to ask. Is there like any? What's your favorite book that you read?
The Last Lecture.
The Last Lecture.
Have you ever read it? It is written by a professor at Carnegie Mellon who it's a book to his kids. And he's diagnosed with terminal cancer. And he writes this book about his last lecture. And it's really interesting to get the perspective of a guy that knows he's about to die.
Yeah.
And I honestly should probably read it again. I haven't read it in a couple of years. But that to me was pretty eye-opening as far as perspective into the world.
Yeah.
My career is important to me.
Yeah.
But it's not everything.
No.
I love my family. I love my daughter. And it was just interesting perspective from a guy that was a professor his whole life. I think he wishes he could have spent more time with his family, knowing that he's, kind of facing the end. So,
yeah, it was, what was it? Will was talking about, he listened to a podcast of a broker, I think out in California, and just talked about how he worked forever and, but like didn't have a relationship with his family. Like, there's some people like that. They just end up having a relationship with their clients and they just forget about their family. Right. And it's, man, it's fleeting, man. It's like, I see my, now, I'm on the back half of like seeing my kids walk out the door, and it's like, man, it's going to be over soon. So it's like, it's like, I told my wife earlier this year, I was like, I need to take my son to school every day this semester because he gets a car next year. Mm-hmm. I ain't ever gonna get that time again,
It's true.
And so that's a big thing I try to do as much as I can. But man, it just, God, it goes quick, dude. And then you get caught up in this business, and you want to have the success in it, but there's a lot of success that needs to be had at home, and it's, money's money. You can always go make money. I saw this the other day. I thought this was pretty cool. It was like talking about how you're juggling 5 things in life: your family, your health, your spiritual life, your work. God, there's one other thing. I can't remember what it was. Oh, your maybe your finances or something. And the work, you're juggling these five things. Work is a rubber ball. Everything else is a glass. You can drop the ball and it's going to bounce back up.
I like that.
You drop the glass on your family, it shatters,
Yep.
And I'm kind of at the age where I've seen a lot of people get divorced, and it's just, it's like, man, like what made you want to go be able to have to spend half the time with your kids? Like, I couldn't.
I mean, and at that point, there's no amount of money that buys you happiness.
No. You can't get that back.
No.
So, yeah, there's no deal. There's no success that you're going to buy or get that's going to outweigh that. So.
Right.
But yeah, no, that's, keep it in perspective, keep it consistent with, with work, but keep it consistent with the family too, man. Like it's going to be there. You know what?
Right.
And if it's not, whatever, like there's always another deal.
Right.
So, well, let me ask you that. This is one other question I always like to ask. Like, do you have is there like any kind of software you like to use that or like any kind of like anything like that that's just like, hey man, this really changed like a lot of things for me. Like, we use Asana, like that was something that was really helpful for me. And so I don't know, you got anything like that?
So we use an interesting CRM. It's called Slick Cactus. Trey Fricky built it from scratch.
Oh, wow.
And it's it's made for commercial real estate, right? Yeah, we've tried them all.
Yeah.
We've tried RE Apps, which was kind of a lead national application. We've looked at, everything under the sun, and none of it's 100% geared toward commercial real estate.
Yeah.
Slick Cactus is great. I love that. But for me, in cold calling, the Zoom info is it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how they're so accurate.
Yeah.
But if you go look up your name or my name right now,
I
guarantee you they have everything on you.
Yeah.
And, I call people all the time. They tell me, how'd you get this number? Like, I do a lot of research, and I'll tell you exactly where I got it if you meet with me.
Yeah.
There
you go.
But everything's public record.
Yeah. No, it is. It's
just a matter of finding where it all is.
It's so cool that we have that stuff now because, man, when we started, you didn't really have anything like that. It was like you just had to go in and hope you could get past the gatekeeper and hope you could get a card and all that stuff, and you'd get an email and then, half the time, it was they had a fake card they'd give this card out.
A guy that didn't exist.
Yeah. So, that's we've been using Reonomy a little bit. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Yeah. And, we like to look at it because it has pretty good, accurate information on the debt maturity. It has a lot of owner contacts too, but I don't think it's as tight as Zoom info. But it's cool looking at the debt maturities because then it's like, okay, hey, this guy's got a note coming due in 12 months. So he's coming off 4, going to go to 8. Kind of got a decision to make, or this guy doesn't have a note at all. This guy might be a great candidate for owner financing,
Absolutely.
And so that's been something we've really used here, and I really enjoy. And I bought a building in Oklahoma City, and we bought it for like 1.1. It's probably worth 2 something, but I found it off market through Reonomy. Got the owner contact, called them. Got a hold of the president of the company, his oil company. They're like, yeah, we're shutting that division down. You want to buy the building? I'm like, yep. And so, boom, we got it. It's funny. We bought the building, we leased it out, and then one of the guys that used to work for the company we bought it from, our tenant defaulted, and we had to get him out. He worked for another very similar operation. He's like, I want that building. I know exactly what it is. Came in and leased it from us.
Man, this whole business is hard work and timing.
Yeah.
Right.
It is.
A lot of timing is a lot of it.
Yep.
That's why you have to stay so consistent when
you're
calling on these groups.
Well, and that's the the consistency of talking about we've probably stole clients from each other multiple times, right? And it's just we were both calling on the same frequency, but it might have been the day you showed up or I showed up was actually real estate day today.
Exactly.
And
they were thinking about it.
They're like, "Oh, man, I'm glad you're here. Like, here you go." And it's like, damn it.
Yep. And everyone's been on the wrong side of that coin.
Yeah. It happens. That's the business. If you don't like competing, this isn't for you.
Right. 100%. And that's an interesting comment. Like back to the football days.
Yeah.
Football taught me a ton about life.
Yeah.
Right. You never quit.
Yeah.
You never quit.
It's, I remember, so I coached my son's football team from from kindergarten through 6th grade. And it was an awesome time. I had the same kids like all the way through up. So it's so cool now watching them in high school. Like there's like, it's my whole team on the field, it's so cool. But I remember after his last game, man, it was, they lost in the championship game, like 12-7. It's really close game, really good game. And, it made me think, I don't know if you remember those t-shirts. They were like sports t-shirts, but they said like football is life. The rest is just details. And I was like, I wrote out this whole thing about his football career at that point. I was like, football is life. The rest is just details. There's, you're gonna have all these trials and tribulations, and then you got to work on a team too, and then you got to be there for that guy to do that, but then you got to be there for yourself. You got to go home and do the things yourself too to make these things work. Commercial real estate brokerage isn't, I wouldn't say more of a team sport. It's kind of an individual sport, but at the same time, it's on you to know your market very well, so that when one of your cadre has a deal.
Yep.
You can help them out and be like, hey, man, here's this building. Here's some info for you, know. And then you expect that to be reciprocated, And if that guy's not keeping up with that kind of stuff, he's kind of like, you're kind of like, come on, man, you need to pull your weight,
right.
So, but I always related that. I was like, football's life. The rest is just details. You learn a lot in that. You kind of learn who you are,
Absolutely.
At some point. Because it's not combat, but it kind of is,
Right. And you get hit in the face and you're taking another snap here in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It's just like cold calling, right?
Yeah.
You get kicked in the teeth and, man, you go to the next space and keep on going.
Yeah. It reminds me of when in Fight Club, when Brad Pitt says, "How much do you know about yourself? You've never been in a fight."
That's a fact.
That's a true fact,
Absolutely.
man. You don't know where you stand if you've never been tested.
Nope.
So, well, let's wrap it up on that, man. I think it's very interesting to hear your perspective on a lot of stuff. It's, we just got a really nice transaction done together. We brokered. That was a good deal. We snuck it in there right before Christmas. So we keep them commission splits high.
Closed early, baby.
So, but yeah, well, thanks for coming on, man. Love to have you back again too. And, kind of get your thoughts on things as they move forward this year. Hopefully 2024 is better than last year. I think it will be. So, but thanks again for coming, and, we'll see you soon.
Sounds good, man. Thanks for having me.